So, as many of you know, biomimicry is about learning from nature. And as I said, I think this is another reason that we really need to preserve the biodiversity we have and encourage it, because in not doing so, we're losing this most valuable resource, this incredible library that we're only just now beginning to figure out how to tap. Now, Janine Benyus wrote this book, Biomimicry, in 1997, and she referred to it as biomimicry innovation inspired by nature. I think actually it should be sustainable innovation inspired by nature, and you could go further and say it's regenerative innovation inspired by nature. And it's actually sustainable in both ways. I think it's sustainable in an economic sense, in terms of business, which sustainability, that's all it means to some business people, but also in a biological sense. And to pick up on that gorgeous kelp we saw, as a biomimicry example, Jay Harmon, who wrote the book The Shark's Paintbrush, spent a lot of time on the ocean in Australia as a kid and was fascinated by the spiral geometry that you saw of that kelp and how that allowed it to hang on to the, and it, water would flow by it easily. And he spent a lot of time looking at that, and as you know, there's spirals everywhere. It's probably the most dominant feature throughout nature. And he found that that's the way everything flows in nature. That's the way our blood is flowing. That's the way our microphones fall off. And you didn't notice the spiral motion of the fall, but and sap in trees. And so he developed this impeller called a lily impeller. I've shortchanged a long development cycle, but what's interesting about this, developing an approach to moving fluids based on the way nature does it, is that this impeller, which looks gigantic, is basically this big. It's like this. And powering that impeller with the power of a couple of medium-sized light bulbs, you can move the water in a 10 million gallon water tank. Now, as you may be familiar with, those giant, usually gray water tanks that sit on top of hills that have all your drinking water in them, they get hot, especially in the summer, and things like to grow in the heat. And so at the top of that layer of water, you've got lots of things starting to grow, and so then the city comes along and dumps a bunch of stuff in there to kill all the stuff that's growing. Well, there's a better way to do that. If you put one of these in the middle of that 10 million gallon tank of water, it'll turn, powered by almost no power, it turns the water. And by doing that, it reduces the amount of chemicals you have to dump in the water by 80%. By over 80%, less chemical remedies need to be, and it reduces the power needed to run the whole system by about 80% as well. So one example of learning from, and I thought I wanted to follow up on that gorgeous kelp. Now this is, a number of you who said you knew about biomimicry probably know about this example. This is the Japanese high-speed train that was aptly called the bullet train. And there was a little problem in that whenever this thing went through a tunnel or went into a tunnel, there was a sonic boom. Now, you can imagine that the locals weren't exactly thrilled by, okay, there were a lot of those trains even back when they started, and that's a lot of sonic booms, and there were a lot of complaints. And the Japanese railway finally assigned a team of engineers to this problem, and they could not crack it. And they have some pretty bright engineers in Japan, and they could not solve, okay, why is this? Well, fortunately, one of the team members was a birder, and he knew that the kingfisher flies along, sees dinner, dives into the water, and there's barely a ripple. Now, we're probably talking hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, but you make a big splash, dinner takes off. And so you work this out, and you come up with an appropriate entry design that eliminates disturbance. Now, the reason I like this example is okay, that's the way you apply biomimicry. It's not simply copying what nature does. It's okay. Now, in this case, the problem was, okay, you're going at high speed from a fluid of one density to a fluid of another. Air to water, water to more dense, or air to more dense air, and you want no disturbance. Well, this character worked it out. So you can imagine they did a little modeling around the nose and beak of this bird, and the new trains are on the right, and the old train is on the left. And okay, new trains eliminated the problem, but additional benefits. The new trains are more fuel efficient by about 10%, and they can go faster. All by thinking, okay, now how did nature solve this problem? And maybe she can help us. We like to point out that nature's R&D lab has been in business for 3.8 billion years. Chances are there are a few things in there that we can learn from. I think so. Spider, carefully working with local materials to make this web. The last thing the spider wants is for some bird to fly into it, and he's got to start all over again. So, clever spider knows that the bird can see ultraviolet light. So, weaves in a few strands. In each of those strands has a few strands, because they're all multiple strands, that reflects ultraviolet light. Well, bird sees it. Unfortunately, we don't. Bugs don't, so we walk into them. And as you may know, every year, hundreds of thousands of birds are killed each year in North America alone, flying into buildings. 250,000 birds flying into buildings. We can see this because it has moisture on it, but gorgeous structure, but the little part in the middle is what we don't see. Okay, Arnold Glass, German company. The piece you see in the middle is made by Arnold, and what they did is in their glass, they weave in some strands that reflect ultraviolet light. So what you see in the middle there is what the bird sees, and this definitely doesn't look like the rest of the landscape, so they stay away. Arnold Glass, interestingly, it's called Ornolux, bird protection glass, and Arnold, for the first time, has a site, an office outside of Germany. It's a German company, and the first outside the U.S. Is not only in the U.S., but it's here in Boston. So we have this resource. The Namib beetle. Namibian desert is probably one of the driest places. It is one of the driest places on Earth, and you can tell by the text running through there. This was a slide I wasn't supposed to use, but it was the one that illustrated the bumps. The bumps are very important, and the channels on the back, hydrophobic and hydrophilic surface, that basically this character, so there's no rainfall at all, and this character climbs up to the top of a sand dune, faces the ocean, and the water runs down its back and into its mouth. So no rainfall at all twice a week. I'll go up and catch the fog, and that's how it survives. All right, California, as you know, has been short of water. These are fog nets on the coast of California, and fog nets have been around for a long time. But NBD Nano, a company here in Boston, standing for Namib Beetle Technologies, they even have the beetle in their logo. I always like it when the inspiration gets acknowledged by the company in a way. What they did is they can mimic that surface by a coating. So they put a coating on these nets that makes the nets 5 times more effective. You get 5 times more water with these nets than you do with just a standard net, all because of okay, how can we copy this surface that the beetle has carefully shown us? The other issue is, look, this is not new. I'm convinced that the reason we're all still here is because our predecessors paid a lot of attention to nature, and that's how they survived. And then we, in the past couple of 100 years, have decided that we can engineer our way out of everything so we don't have to pay attention anymore to the lessons that nature has to offer. But the Inuit, when they decided that they were going to build houses, they cleverly figured they might as well work with the most abundant building material they had, which was ice. And then you have a dilemma. Well, how thick do you make the wall of an igloo? Well, they went to a local resident who builds ice caves, and I assume they checked it out when the resident wasn't in. And the average thickness of an igloo is the average thickness of a polar bear's ice cave. And as I say, this is not new. This had been going on for a long time. Now, but the other thing about biomimicry is, look, we have to go deeper. It's not just, okay, this is what they did, that's good. But how does nature do this? So again, this elegant spider web, but the tensile strength of those fibers is 5 times stronger than steel. And there are labs around the world, Japan, here, at MIT, at Harvard, trying to deconstruct, okay, how does this work? And making progress, but haven't done it yet. But the thing that's important is, okay, all of nature works with local materials. Everything is local materials at ambient temperature, ambient pressure, and using a very few of the most abundant chemicals. Okay, what's the most abundant resource we have? And water is the solvent. And we, on the other hand, you know, make steel, high temperature, high pressure, caustic solvents. And yet, okay, an abalone shell. The nacre on that shell is twice as tough as the strongest ceramic we can yet make. And again, a few of the most abundant chemicals. Carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen, everything, and then common to everything, calcium, chlorine, magnesium, potassium, and sulfur. Okay, those are the building blocks. And then beyond that, okay, there are trace elements, a very few. We, on the other hand, use the whole set and, you know, trying to figure out, okay, can we create some more? There is a better way, as we just saw. Now, you may think you're looking at a whole bunch of colors. Well, you are, but you are looking at one color pigment, and it's brown. All the rest is reflected color. And as you may know, to make color pigments, we use some pretty nasty stuff. Cadmium, chromium, not really good for us, some serious problems with what it does to our health. Nope, nature has figured out how to do it entirely structurally. The Morpho Butterfly, and as you go down in size and look at how it's done, the thing is we need to go down even more because the structure is actually a 3-dimensional structure. And what's interesting is, at first I thought, oh, that's cool. So there's a blue structure and there's a yellow structure. No, every single species, the structure, just because this is totally different. So everything has evolved their way of reflecting color, but the color is 4 times as bright and it's permanent, never fades. Structural. Think of the implications that we can gain from that. Now, we've talked about ecosystems and we saw a gorgeous one that I think we've got to all work together to make sure it does get protected. Coral reef. And just before, one of the things, we talk about these individual lessons that biomimicry brings, you know, and it's usually the way to hook people about, gee, this is really important stuff. But what we can learn from a mature ecosystem, I think, is a very important lesson for business. And whether it's a reef or whether it's a mature forest, redwood forest, whatever, and they're resilient. Now, resilience has become a buzzword in the corporate world, and so it would seem to me appropriate to look at, okay, what's the most resilient? It has one problem with Homo sapiens, but everybody else, it's really resilient. And it's all about collaboration, cooperation, mutualism between species, this interchange of materials, of information within a mature ecosystem is how they manage to be resilient. And so I think we need to get more business people into mature ecosystems and have them discover how they are resilient. But there are also individual lessons here. And this, coral made by pulling carbon dioxide and using that. Okay, there's this blue planet makes cement that does exactly that. Now, as you may know, to make a ton of cement, you produce a ton of CO2. And we use, excuse my French, a hell of a lot of cement in this world. It's the most biggest material we use to build anything. Ton of CO2 for every ton of cement. A ton of this uses half a ton of CO2 to be made. So CO2 is used as a feedstock to make this carbon mix. Again, let's go back and how does coral do this incredible job of making this? Let's use that recipe. Now, I'm not Anna Maria, but we work together, and I wanted to share with you a couple of the Green Harbors project that Anna Maria has been working on for a number of years. And the key is to work with local communities. So local community involvement is absolutely essential. And she's been working with, we have in Boston, Cohasset, Gloucester, Nantucket, and Orleans, and Wellfleet. And I want to share with you some work. And again, we keep hearing these terrible stories, but now let's look at oysters. And eelgrass did even worse in 95% since the 1800s. But so the objective, and this is the project team, Oyster Relief Restoration Project from 2011 to 2014. Anna Maria was the principal investigator. And the area in red is the 2-acre site that was worked on in this project. And basically, in that area, they put 300 tons of shells as substrate for the spat to hang on to. And again, a lot of local community involvement in this project, which is essential. And on the left is 2011, and on the right is 2012. And you can see it worked. And then by 2013, there was extensive research, monitoring, and analysis, and there was increased biodiversity. Oyster population was up by 90%. Sorry, I don't have eelgrass. They weren't checking on that. But oysters were up by 90%, 5.8 million oysters in 3 years, and providing a 70% nitrogen sink. So part of, as many of you know, all of this work with oysters on the Cape is the little problem that all the septic sewage approach the Cape has in their sandy soil. There's a serious nitrogen problem, and oysters, which, as most of you know, mature oyster can filter up to 50 gallons of water a day, and that's just one mature oyster. So busy little fellows. They did have on this project a major setback in 2014 with Sandy and a number of storms which slowed down the growth. The project received a number of awards, Mass Recycle Municipal Innovation in 2013, Engineering Excellence Silver Award, and in 2014, the National Award for Public Service. Biomimicry Living Lab, and again, the approach of these living labs is very much all about working with both community and with the students. And the whole idea is it's instead of sitting in a classroom, you are putting seagrass into a floating island, and that's Anna Maria in the foreground. Born to be wild, her favorite creature is obviously the oyster. And Nantucket being one of the other places that she's done both floating biomimicry living labs and major oyster restoration projects. And this is in Savin Hill Cove, where right next to Boston University's campus. And basically the idea is to implement a holistic nature-inspired solutions to environmental challenges that provide graduate and undergraduate students with a hands-on research experience. So it's teaching, but it's very much hands-on, and this is bringing back these ecosystems, and it's in problem areas. This is right next, but you get the problem. Like, okay, the road's underwater most of the time, and that literally the site is, you know, right over here. And as I say, engagement, even finding sharks that have gotten into the area and can't get out, but all ways of engaging both the community and the students in this work. And they love it. And it's everything from kids in nursery school to college students. I'm almost finished. As we all know, a sustainable world already exists. It's right outside. And what we need to do is pay more attention to learning from it. You know, Buckminster Fuller liked to point out that the Earth was like a spaceship without an operating manual. And I maintain that actually, now he actually wrote one, but the point is we do have an operating manual. We've always had one, but we are now rediscovering how to read that operating manual. And we have to, in order to us to survive and the planet to survive, is pay attention to that, that operating manual. And so why did I do that? So thank you very much.